Welcome to Humans of Authenticity. This is V, and thank you for tuning into our conversation today with Allegra Tasaki. I met Allegra for the first time at the ASAE annual meetings, and I instantly got a positive energy from her. So much that I had to invite her to share the stories in this episode. I hope you like it. Thank you, Allegra, for making the time for Humans of Authenticity with me today. Let's start with your story. Could you share 3 things that you love about yourself?
Sure. It's so funny. I just subscribed to an app called Calm. You've probably seen it advertised. And I subscribed to it because it allows me to have like a moment in time. I don't have time to like meditate 30 minutes a day, but I could do it if it's broken up throughout the day. So this app allows me to do that. And one of the things that I really like about myself is the fact that I've come to a point in my life where I've recognized that sometimes you feel overwhelmed because of things that are going on professionally, personally, or maybe it's a combination of both. And I've finally come to a point where it's like, it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. And sometimes asking for help could just be subscribing to an app, or it could be calling up your colleague and saying, I can't do all this data entry myself. So that's one of the things that I like, is recognizing those things within myself and providing my own solutions. The other thing that I really like about myself is that this past week, I've had several people tell me that they think that I am approachable and friendly. And, that's the kind of person that I want to be. It's not something that I really thought a lot about because I'm an extreme extrovert. Sometimes I don't filter things. Sometimes things don't come through my filter, but it's always nice when people recognize a quality in you and they tell it to you, because not everybody does. And it was just great to have somebody say, you're so approachable and you're friendly, and I really appreciate you being my cheerleader. So I'm hoping to keep that up. And I would say the third thing that I like about myself is, I don't know, let's see, what would I really like or love about myself? As a woman, you don't typically think of these kinds of things, but these are all based on these experiences that I had within the past. I like the fact that I'm a creative person in the weirdest way. We're at a point where we're empty nesters here at home. I like to cook. And so a lot of things that I had been putting together for a couple of decades don't necessarily work anymore because it's too much food. So now I've got to figure out how to pull that down into something different. So what we're doing now is approaching our refrigerator with a whole new perspective. What will we have today? And every day it's like a restaurant meal. And so, I might have teriyaki chicken one day, but there's not quite enough to have it for 2 meals because we like to sort of like balance that out. But I've got a little bit of pasta left over. So one day it's going to be Japanese restaurant. Next day it's going to be, Italian restaurant. So who knows? But it is definitely a lot of fun. And
That
I
sounds
really,
like an amazing kitchen you have there.
yeah.
Just on that note of creative combination of ingredients, I've tried curry stew dish, and it's made of beef and scallops. And it's like the best sort of combinations in that sort of weird surf and turf. Who would have thought that beef stew and scallops would go really well together?
Yeah. Well, that's a really nice high protein training meal as well. Like if you do any kind of exercise on a regular basis, that protein intake will give you a lot of energy the next day. So I definitely want that recipe because I need the energy.
I'll try and find that recipe for you. There are a lot of elements I want to unpack in the 3 elements that you've just shared. So let's look at the first one. You mentioned that it came to a point where you realized that it's okay to accept help, it's okay to not be okay. Can you share with me what was the experience, the trigger or the catalyst that made you realize that you can accept help and allow yourself to receive help?
There were a couple of things. that have happened. I have a friend of mine who has a certain healthcare condition that could get worse, could develop into cancer, but most likely won't. But they're feeling overwhelmed. And I just had the conversation with them to say, look, you know what? Little history. My aunt had the same kind of condition, and we all felt overwhelmed, but we couldn't tell her that. We wanted her to have the open space to find comfort and care. You're human. It's okay to not be okay. The other piece of it is with two college students now, they have to deal this Gen Z is dealing with a lot. And there's a lot of self-medicating with vaping and drugs. They understand that it's okay not to be okay, but they haven't taken it to the next step beyond the self-medication. And that is, it's okay to not be okay, and you have to seek help, appropriate help. Doing things, quote, all on your own is a myth. No one does anything all on their own. We all get help from somewhere else. I grew up in a not great situation, socioeconomically extremely disadvantaged. And I survived because I had help. I had literally like hundreds of people throughout my childhood who pitched in and helped me out. So, food, clothing, giving me a little bit of respite from my own situation at home. I learned at a very early age that human beings typically by nature are good people. Most people are good people. Most people have a heart. They want to help. I didn't ask for help as a kid, but boy, people really they pulled it together for me. And it made me realize that there is this myth that is put out there in the American culture that you have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and that's not true. Somebody else is going to help you pull your boots on every once in a while, and we can help each other do that. And then if you receive help, you do have to pay it forward.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate that you keep reminding us that it's okay to seek help and allow ourselves to receive help. From the anthropological perspective, human beings from the early stage, we start as small groups and tribes, and that's how we build ourselves and how we can thrive through centuries and centuries. So it's interesting with this day, the mental health and well-beings in the picture. There are all sort of spectrums. Either we isolate ourselves, think that we are superpower, or we can again thrive in a network. I really like that.
The only way to survive, but it's also the only way to be happy.
Yeah, I have another interview about happiness. I'll definitely tag you in when that episode goes live. I think it's another interesting way to look at authenticity in the context of happiness and vice versa. There is another comment you made earlier about recognizing our strengths. And you also make a comment that as women, we don't normally do these things. Personally, can you talk through some of the example and some of the strategies so that we can empower ourselves to start recognizing the small things, small good things that are happening for us?
Yeah, it's so funny. I think as women, we're socialized to be the peacemakers, and there's a very specific role, right? You can't be too assertive because then you're perceived as aggressive. But if you were a man, there aren't any limits. Oh, he's just doing his thing. I think that it's really hard as a woman to navigate your way through that. I took some time off to raise my family. I was a stay-at-home mom. I had a career. I got my degrees. I worked for about 15 years. Then I took time off to have my family and raise them. Then I went back to work and have, been at work since then. And the thing about that is, if you realize that your life it's not one whole continuum of things. It's broken up into segments, right? So like you have infancy, early childhood, grade school, high school, post high school, career development and college and all those kinds of things. And it gets broken up into all these segments, right? And the thing is, as a woman, it's really hard to navigate through all of those segments because there are societal pressures about appearance, about the roles that you play, and what your place is in society. We have to understand, we have to develop strategies to be able to be the best person we can be and create our own sense of fulfillment, but within these confines that society has put out there. And it changes with every stage of your life. That's why I was sort of referring to this whole segmented piece of it, right? And so doing that, it's stressful because it's part of your identity. And I think what's really interesting as I watch my own kids, they're Gen Z, and I have conversations with millennials with whom I'm friends and people in my own generation, Gen X. It's really interesting to sort of see how very different those three generations think about the role of women and how we're allowed or not allowed to evolve versus, like, say, my mom's generation, the silent generation or boomers. And it's much more, it's easier for those past generations because it's black and white. It's like, this is what a woman is, this is what you do, this is what you wear. It's much more fluid now than it has ever been, but we still have some of those residual confinements to deal with. I have been told on a number of occasions that I am aggressive. And at that point, I actually pull the person aside. I say, I just want you to know aggression implies violence. Do you feel that there is violence behind the words and the actions that I'm putting out there? And they usually think for a minute. They're like, no. And I said, then I'm assertive, not aggressive. I'm bringing that up because I think we throw these terms around, and I want you to understand that I don't have an intent of violence or a threat of violence behind my words and actions. And it means a lot to me to have that differentiated. This is aggression, this is assertiveness. And so it's been an interesting conversation to have because women don't want to have that conversation and they're uncomfortable. Well, in a different way than the men are. And they resent that conversation and they don't want me to have that conversation with them. They'll resent it up front. They'll think about it for a minute and then they're like, oh, all right. And they don't always agree, but they'll agree to disagree. And there's sort of like, I feel like there's a little bit more respect, I guess. And typically I won't bring it up in a group setting per se. I'll always pull the person aside. And I've done it a number of times and I'm going to continue to do it. It's been an interesting response.
It's really interesting to see in your stories how you really go full in any conversation as yourself. And I can really see the genuine energies coming from that conversation. And this is a good steps to move to our second part of the episode today so that we can talk about your choice of keywords. So I provide you with 12 keywords to choose from. Which one did you select?
I selected innovation.
And in the context of authenticity, how do you interpret innovation?
I picked innovation because I had a great conversation with my dad. My dad, he'll like kill me for saying this. My dad is basically a retired rocket scientist. He used to work at NASA and he was launching rockets and mostly satellites. He's super smart. We haven't always had these great conversations, but lately, I don't know, we just have. And he specifically asked me this question. He said, so what do you think? Like, this guy's retired, right? But he's very aware of what's going on in society. He said, what do you think about this remote work or hybrid work? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? And I was like, oh, God, I think it's great in some respects and awful in others. I said, that's really awful because a lot of people who weren't, quote, doing the work are able to hide that even more. And it's really hard to manage somebody virtually. That just is really hard. But it gives women so much more flexibility. I remember when I went back to work, I had no flexibility. My boss was just like, no, I had to beg for 10 minutes so that I could come in once a week, 10 minutes early, so that I could leave 10 minutes early so I could make my kids carpool. So I said to my dad, the flexibility is just fabulous. I would never want to work in an all virtual environment. And I don't think anyone ever should. I feel really strongly about that. And the reason is innovation. You cannot, as human beings, innovate as effectively and efficiently when you are in a remote situation as you can when you're in person. That's why strategic planning meetings, you'll notice they take place in person, because our brains can only think so quickly at any given time. And they're stimulated by being together and gathering in person. They're not stimulated by technology. Technology is assistive in innovation, but it is not the iterative part of innovating. I'm realizing as I work in a hybrid environment, how important it is, even though it's a hassle and a half to commute into DC and get into work. Every time I'm in the office, even little things, there is always something that I learn about either what's happening with my team or different projects that I can then apply innovatively to what I'm doing for the betterment of the work and our members. And so I just think that innovation isn't always about the tool. It's about how you use the tools and how you spend that time with other people who are also using those tools, and how you implement the work and iterate new ideas.
Can you give me a specific examples of that sort of human interactions help you to learn new things and then apply it to your work?
Sure. We live in a world of like databases and apps. Everything is based on a database. So your app, your website, your email system, your CRM, everything is there. It's all about a database, right? But how you pull the data, review the data, develop your target audiences from that data, your customer journeys, those kinds of things is what really matters. I mean, you can have all these tools and you can have all these things, but if you don't really know how to operate them and implement pieces of your strategic plan, you're sort of dead in the water. When I went into the office this week, I got to discover a few things about a tool that is going to impact our ability to reach our target audiences. I went in and I had a conversation with a colleague and discovered that, oh, guess what? We're missing a whole group of people because our API wasn't working correctly. I wouldn't have known that had I not stopped by that person's office and talked to them and discovered, oh, guess what? So-and-so didn't get it. We did a few testing and we discovered where the data was residing, and we could fix that process. I also discovered a couple of other little things that would impact our app, which I'm supposed to release on Monday. And, being able to problem solve ahead of time and get that settled wouldn't have happened had I not been in the office and having that conversation with yet another person. So there's always something that's going to come up, especially when you're in a really busy cycle. But in the slower cycles, it's kind of, it has a different effect, right? You'll have other different kinds of conversations that aren't so imminently involved with a project that's due like in the coming weeks. So for example, we're going to combine a couple of our e-publications. Not really sure how we're going to do that, but I'm going to put together sort of some ideas for us to brainstorm and think about, and some visuals, and then we'll get together and we'll be able to figure out how we want to present the next step so that we can get our volunteer board or committees involved and get their feedback. And that's innovation, because you're looking at efficiency, but you're also looking at efficacy. Like, what is the best way to communicate? What are the best vehicles? And what are the best channels and times? So it's a whole other world. And that cannot really happen online.
Yeah, that's really bring the example to life for me. And in retrospective, I realized that when we introduce new ideas, we'll have different perspective on the ideas, supportive as well as unsupportive. So here's the question. Let's say if we are launching a new website, a new system, for example, in your view, what's the best way for us to onboard our team, our stakeholders, to make sure that everyone are fully supportive of this new initiative, new software, new system?
That's a really hard question, because if you have team members who are always remote and never come in, or maybe like across the country, that makes it really hard. I always like to start with an agenda. I call it an open agenda. Typically what I'll do is I'll do an agenda. It's open because I'll send it out to all the team members that are involved, whether they're like committee members, board members, fellow staffers, or maybe a consultant. I'll start out with that open agenda and say, add to this whatever you think needs to be added, put it in where you think it needs to go. And I'll give a time frame. Can you do it by Friday? I'll get all the responses back. It's one document. We just share it. It's out there. People just put in their ideas. And then I'll assign times to it, because oftentimes what happens is people get off on tangents, and we can table ideas and then come back to them for another gathering if we need to do that. And then it's ahead of that gathering. Have everyone that you can possibly have gather in person. And for those who can't, they need to be, on a screen there. If you're the organizer, you do have to make sure that people who are on that screen are directly involved and get asked questions, kind of like what you and I are doing here, where you're asking me questions and I'm participating. You have to be really cognizant as an organizer to make sure that those people and their views are heard, because they might say something that could save you thousands of dollars, or they might say something that could save your organization reputationally. You just don't know where the good ideas and methodologies are going to come from. And if you really want to be a part of the product that comes out of these in-person gatherings, you have to really be aware of that and intentional.
Yeah, I agree on that intentionality and the awareness side of it. Without awareness, we won't be able to pivot and transform. We talk a lot about innovations in the context of professional work. I love us to take a step back and then reflect on yourself. What role does innovation play in how you express your authentic self?
I don't really think about my authentic self and innovation. I think I just come from a long line of innovators. My grandfather was a scientist who immigrated to this country shortly after World War II, shortly after my dad was born. And he's pretty well known, Dr. Ichiji Tasaki. He died just short of his 100th birthday. He worked for 50 years at NIH, and before that, he was at University of St. Louis. He was extremely prolific in his experiments and his paper writing. Very innovative. Built his own tools in the lab so that he could conduct certain experiments, that kind of innovation. I'm not that kind of innovator. My dad, in his work, was also an innovator, which is why he was on so many teams for so many launches, and very systems oriented, had a really good handle on how to bring together teams and get them on board, frankly, getting the work done. And in his own personal life, he's a very innovative problem solver. I didn't grow up with my dad. I did grow up seeing him, and he made efforts to see me all the time. We had a bond from a very young age. He didn't believe me, but I have memories from when I was like 2, not even 2. And when I described like the house that we lived in and I described the surroundings, that's when he started to believe me. I would say that I had a lot of exposure to these innovators. I think I grew up always knowing that there is always a solution to every challenge. There is never a challenge that doesn't have a solution or a resolution. And it may not be pretty, it may not cover everything, but it will cover most of it. The one thing that doesn't have a quote solution is death, but death might be a solution. I can honestly say I haven't come across a challenge that I haven't been able to find some kind of resolution. It hasn't always been pretty.
It reminds me of how our upbringings impact how we grow up and how we get into life. My dad is an electrical engineer, and he's one of the individual that extremely handy. He can
Yes.
build anything that we need at home. I remember my dad and my mom used to operate this very seasonal bakery. At the time, there wasn't a large enough commercial oven available so that my mom can bake multiple cakes at the same time. Guess what? My dad ended up build the entire oven, like this big, I kid you not, so that my mom can bake cake easier and faster for her clients.
Oh my goodness.
Do
Was it
you
a
have
gas
any?
oven or electric oven?
It's an electric oven because gas wasn't even a thing at the time in my country. And this was over 30 years ago.
Yeah, you don't
Can
look
you,
old to say that.
let's skip this part. Is there any good childhood stories along the line of how you observe the way your dad thinking or the way your grandfather thinks that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's so funny. My parents were separated and divorced at a very young age. I was like 2. Dad couldn't find us for a while. Really bad family history story there. But best part of it was he met and remarried someone, and I ended up getting adopted. So I was really happy and still am very happy and very fortunate. Together, when we would come out, my sister and I would come out for our visits, they would plan this extravaganza of travel, museums, and historical sites. Now, I like amusement parks and roller coasters. I can totally do that. But these vacations were just awesome. And I really loved it. I can remember every historical site, museum, interpretive center, all of those visits. In fact, sometimes mom and I will be having a conversation. I'll say, "Oh, yeah, remember that time when we did this?" And she'll be like, "No, I don't. But now that you're saying it, now you're reminding me, now I remember." One of the things that was really great about it is that they didn't present it as, we're going to do education. You're going to learn this and you're going to learn that. And we're going to do this. We're going on a family trip. We're going to have an adventure. And my father, he's the ultimate planner. He literally, before computers were a thing, we had these 8.5 by 11 sheets where it planned out every meal for every day for the entire week. So we knew we had food covered.
I love that.
Very much. So it was sort of like we could play Battleship for meals. A7. Oh, we're having hamburgers and French fries. B3. Oh, that's going to be teriyaki chicken and broccoli.
Yeah.
Every
such a
time.
good way.
And so there was a lot, I think, that I absorbed and learned out of all of those different places that we traveled to. And it was by car. And we didn't have phones. We didn't have little screens in the car. It was always radio. So my sister and I would fall asleep. We'd wake up and, oh, guess what? You are in Williamsburg and you are going back in time. So I think the combination of that systems oriented thinking, the way my dad was, but my parents really enjoyed seeing things through our perspective. And so that's the reason why we didn't have this prescriptive educational objective, but it was kind of there in the background.
I love that. And I treasure family trips. I think that's one of the best ways to spend time, quality time with our loved one. So let's move to the next question. Now, the reason why I find putting innovation and authenticity together is an interesting combination because on one hand, I see that authenticity encourages us to maintain our one constant true north, as in our core value. On the other hand, innovation encourages us to push the boundaries, refresh ourselves, produce new inputs to engage with our audience. So in your view, how can we reconcile these two seemingly polarized items together and make sense of them?
You know, you bring up a really good point. I think for most people, they're sort of polarized, but you have to sort of reframe the thinking, right? Most human beings like routine. They like knowing what's going to come next. That's just sort of human nature. And change is scary. And innovation, I grew up in a state of constant change and survival. I'm much more comfortable with it. So I'm like, it's not that I feel that I have to have an adrenaline rush all the time. It's that I need to have an intellectual rush all the time. That's what I inherited from my family. We get bored if we're not open to learning new things and having new experiences. And I see that more now because I've had all this time in life now to observe and be a part of and be immersed in that way of thinking and that lifestyle. My grandfather was blackballed, couldn't find a job because he questioned authority, and you don't do that in Japan. And when he came here, he was already a well-established scientist and continued to grow and excel. At one point, his work was stolen. Didn't have computers. It was on carbon, literally
Right.
where the term carbon copy comes in, right? And so my grandmother told me she came into the lab and the person who stole it had literally, like, she didn't see them actually take it, but she had been there like an hour earlier and that person came in, and when they left, it was gone. So his paper was stolen, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is his work product based on the experiments that he had performed over the previous 3 to 6 months. So it's a lot of work. But so funny, he said he was upset and he was angry, upset, and bitter about it. But he also kind of counterbalanced that with, it's my work. Everybody knows it's my work. And because it's based on all the work that I did even before those experiments. And the work that I'm producing now, the next few papers that I have that came after that, everybody knew. So they didn't say it, they didn't acknowledge it. There's no way not to know that in that arena. And so I think finding a way, he had to innovate and continue his innovation so that he could then put out what the real truth was. And it's uncomfortable. My dad, his world was rocked when his first marriage didn't last and he had to innovate. Times were hard and he was trying to build his own career and he was extremely concerned about his 2 daughters. He didn't have time to sit down and mourn the loss. He had to get his tail in gear, make sure that he could find us. He wanted to make sure that he had his bills paid, those kinds of things, and also being able to set up his own career that he would feel fulfilled at and be able to last a long time in. And so I watched them, and I watched my mom. She was an industrial designer. The one woman in her
That is an
program.
extremely competitive
Yes,
program for women. Yeah.
very close to mechanical engineering, by the way.
Wow. Right.
I learned so much from her about how to navigate those waters that we talked about a little earlier, about what roles women play and how we're perceived and what we're allowed to say or do or not say or not do, right? So, and we have those conversations today. These are innovations. They're not tools, but they're innovations about the way we think, the way we approach a challenge, and the way that we solve our problems. And I think that's where it is.
So what I'm hearing is as we go through our work, as we innovate and produce outputs, somewhere along the line, we manage to develop our own signature in the work. So regardless of where it is being implemented or being seen, that signature is really loudly, clearly say it is us. Really love
Yes.
that.
It's so interesting that you say being seen. That is the key part of it.
Yeah. And this go back to your point earlier about other people recognizing us.
Yes.
I really like how it's everything connect together.
It
It's amazing.
all kind of comes together.
Yeah. We are getting towards the end of the episode. We talk a lot about things happening in your life, your stories, a lot about what happened in the past. So now I want us to shift gear, looking forward. What's next for you in the coming 12 months? More innovations?
Yeah. One thing I will say is that I have so much on my plate right now that sometimes I feel like I just don't have time for the innovation because I'm sort of doing it as I go along. But in the next 12 months, I've already started thinking about really better planning and just even it doesn't have to be like this grand scheme, right? What it is how do I want to be a little bit more efficient in the things that I'm doing? Because I haven't had a lot of control over that, especially with in the position that I'm in. Things coming out of the pandemic. I mean, there's just a lot of recovery there. We're changing a few things about how we are going to approach one of our conferences. And then two of our conferences are like back to back. So the planning piece of that is going to be really important. And one of the things that I used to do a lot of was use a tool called Asana, project management software. This organization where I currently am uses Basecamp. I think I actually like Basecamp better for some things. I don't need Gantt charts and all that. That's all lovely, but that's not going to help us because we're not working on 3 to 5 year programs right now. And so what I want to do in the next 12 months is really use this innovative tool to help me develop the different work paths that I know have to be implemented so that we're not missing any opportunities to connect with and grow our target audiences. That's on the professional side. On the personal side, it's a direct impact because if I can pull that together professionally, I won't have to work so many long hours, right? Like you can cut the hours down so that you can have a more balanced life. Got that right now, but I could see that if I don't pull things together within the next couple of months, that it could get out of control. So I'm kind of looking forward to really getting that piece of it together a little bit more solidly.
So what I'm hearing is in terms of professional life, you are going to embrace this new tool of Basecamp. I think at the end of the day, a good tool is only good if the entire teams are using it and embracing it. So I love how you tackle it from the embracing perspective rather than forcing.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because we actually have a new task force and we've made a Basecamp card. So you can in Basecamp, I like everything because it's all in cards. So it's easy to sort of, but you still need to put together a system behind that. So we use Basecamp for our conferences and I use it for marketing. But it's interesting. The conference manager has told me like it's a hot mess right now for the conferences, but for the task force, it's not. And the reason it's not is because we've set it up to have a system. There are certain protocols to follow. So we have sort of like the card where all the documents are. Those are final. Those aren't working documents. In messages, we have a pinned message where there are working files and they're all linked so that everybody's working off of one document. You're not uploading and downloading, getting all confused. So part of it is getting a system within the system together, because that's the only way you can get that innovative tool to really do the things that you would like it to do.
Nice.
It's a combination of things.
Yes, combination of things. Totally agree. Let's get to the last question in here. If you were to win a world-class prestigious award, so think about an Oscar or a Nobel Prize, what award would you win and for what skill?
If I was ever given an award, it would be the Nobel Peace Prize. It's not about the skill. I don't want an award for the skill. I don't really even want an award, but if I were to get an award, it would be the Nobel Peace Prize, because any monetary gain from that could be put toward the things that I really care about, and that I think the things that most people really care about. And that is, food, faith, and family. Being able to help others who may not be as fortunate as you are or as privileged as you are. I don't come from a privileged background. I am privileged now because I have a different life than I had before. I recognize that because I remember where I came from. I think that anytime you are in a position of privilege or power, that you should use that for the betterment of others, whether it's providing homes or food or counseling and mental health services. I don't really care. It's got to be for someone else, because your life isn't really worth living if you're only living it for yourself.
I really love that. And I know that you talked about paying forward before, but this really ramped it up for me. And I feel really emotional hearing it. So thank you for sharing.
That's it for today's episode. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on the chosen keyword. Have a lovely time, and thank you again for spending time with Humans of Authenticity. Until next time.